very key principle. So far what we've done is we've discussed certain basic general principles in this entire matter. If you notice, we're not going into excessive detail. That's a tremendous avodah to go into detail in that kind of sense, and we're not going to do it. But we formulated certain key principles. The principle of the Ummah Olam, which Ummah Olam is capable of giving back to Klal Yisrael. The principle of consumption, where Klal Yisrael is the object of consumption. The principle of the consumer itself, the reverse. You see, these are important general principles itself. Now, there is another very key principle also here. We said that in order to be one of the Ummah Olam, you have to have a certain amount of Kedusha. Correct? You have to. You've got to have a certain amount of Kedusha. However, there's the same principle could be said in reverse. In reverse. What do I mean? What I mean is the following. I want to understand a very key part of the Chumash itself. A very critical thing. Just like in order for a nation to become the repository of the earth of Klal Yisrael, it has to have a certain amount of Kedusha, right? In order for it to be a repository of the earth of Klal Yisrael, it has to have a certain amount of Tumah as well. What do I mean? The inverse. I mean the following. Klal Yisrael could go through many levels of Chatoim. They could be, Chal can do certain Chatoim, then they could do tremendous Chatoim, and then they could be tremendous Rishonim. I mean, there are many, many levels of Hashchosa, or Kitwig, which are possible on Klal Yisrael, depending how bad they become, correct? What you require is the following, that the worse Klal Yisrael becomes, then the Ummah Olam, which gives back the earth of Klal Yisrael, must have more and more Tumah in order to hold it. It's the inverse as well. You see, in order to hold any Kedusha of Klal Yisrael, that nation, that Ummah must have a certain amount of Kedusha, and we explain basically where it gets it from. But what we see is that there is another variable here. That variable is called the Tumah level of the Ummah Olam, which must correspond to the Tumah which Klal Yisrael brings in by its own Chatoim. You see, I'll explain.
It must be empowered for something.
It's empowered to be. Well, in other words, why is that? For the following reason. We're giving a marshal. Let's say Klal Yisrael does. Here you have the Satan, okay? Here you have the sword, right? Okay? Let's say Klal Yisrael does a chet called A. Okay? There are three levels of chet. A is the simplest level, B is the next, and C is the worst. Do we have that? Do we have that? A is the simplest chet, B is a more stronger, and C is the worst chet, okay? That's a variation in the chet of Klal Yisrael. Now, a variation in the chet of a Jew or Klal Yisrael is a variation in the amount of klipa that envelops it, or tumah that results as a result of the chet. When someone does a certain chet A, there's a certain amount of tumah that will envelop that person because of his association with that chet. If he does a worse chet, he's dovik to more tumah, and a worse chet, that more tumah. So that depending on the hierarchy of chetoim, it has to do with your association with the hierarchy of tumah. You see, when you associate with A, for example, when you do chet A, and you have a certain amount of tumah, right? Your earth that you lose will go in a tumah level called A. But if you do chet B, then there's more tumah, so what happens is that all goes down to a deeper level of tumah called B, and so on, called C, or let's say prime. You see what I'm saying? You see what I'm saying? In other words, the worse the chet, the more tumah you associate with. Therefore, when you lose the earth to the tumah, the earths are embedded in deeper and deeper levels of tumah. So in order to retrieve it, you've got to go down to deeper and deeper levels of tumah to get it back. You see, if you want to get back the earth that you've lost from chet A, you've got to go to tumah A prime. You see, which is a certain level of the something. It's clear. If you want to get back C, you've got to put your hands into C prime tumah to take it back. Do you understand what I'm saying? Therefore, the amount of chet depends on the tumah itself. Now, what does that have to do? Aha! These Ummah Olam vary by tumah. You see, so it depends on what kind of chatoim Klal Yisrael do. If chatoim does light chatoim, relatively light, then they have to become this Arab with nations which have light degrees of tumah, because the earth will be found in light degrees of tumah. But if they do very bad chatoim, then Klal Yisrael must interact with the ones low on the scale in some way to get it back. What?
The worst color.
It's a worse color, right? So therefore, in other words, the kind of chet that a Klal Yisrael does determines the kind of ummah it will interact, and therefore determines to which ummah it will be exiled into Gullus. You see the principle? A very important principle.
That rating, whenever a mullet attacks or whatever.
Well, please, don't say
leave him out
anything.
of it?
Please, don't say anything. I'll get to that. There's a reason.
Well,
why.
let's just say.
No, there's a reason. Do you understand this principle? So it's the inverse. In order to become, again, the repository of Jews to take yours, there's got to be a minimum amount of Kedusha to hold the oil of a Yid. And that, of course, comes from Eitiv Mishmor with its interaction. But that's one variable. But having given the variable of Kedusha, you see, once an Ummah has the proper on Kedusha, depending on which Ummah is chosen, depends on the descent of Klal Yisrael in their Chatoim, and therefore the intensity of the Kitrug. Or, in other words, where that all resides. The worse the Chet, then the all resides in worse and worse Tumah. Do you see what I'm saying? Oh, now we get to the heart of the matter. A very, very big Kiddush. A very, very big Kiddush. It is very obvious from this. When the Buddhism said to Avram, that I will always make sure that your Ummah of Klal Yisrael survives, right? Avram said, how do I know that survives? So the Buddhism said, I will supply the mechanism which we retrieved, right? But there's one catch here. When the Buddhism promised to Avram that they will survive, the Buddhism promised to Avram that they will survive, right? No matter how many chatoim they do. In other words, there will always be a level of tumah in which they will able to take it back from. You see what I'm saying? There must be. You understand? There's got to be a nation. You see, obviously, therefore, the Ummah must have a distribution of tumah, so that Klal Yisrael, as they descend in more and more hashchasa or avera, can correspond to ummahs which represent greater and greater levels of hashchasa. So ummahs they can retrieve it. You can never have a situation where the hashchasa of Klal Yisrael exceeds the tumah of a guy, of the guy of Ummah Salem. You know what I mean? Because if you have that level, then Klal Yisrael is lost. Because it means that there is no Goyish nation that they can go into to retrieve it. It means it goes into the bowels of the Satan, and it can never be taken out. Because there is no Ummah that can represent that level of Tumah. So therefore, Klal Yisrael cannot be persecuted by any one of those Ummahs. Do you see what I'm saying? That's a very subtle concept. There must always be an Ummah who has a low enough Tumah to correspond to the lowest madleg of Klal Yisrael.
The Hashchasa of an Ummah also depends on the Hashchasa of Yisrael.
No, it depends on its own. It's on its own. But it must be motzoi. It has to be found, an Ummah, which can serve, can have that kind of Tumah. Because Chas v'Shalom, if Klal Yisrael, wait a minute, I'll get into that in a second. If Klal Yisrael, hold on. We'll get into that in a second. You'll see in a second where we're heading to. If Klal Yisrael ever gets involved with its Hashchos and its Averis are so bad that it's worse than the Tumah of any Ummah Oilam by its own koyach, where are they going to take it back from? You see, what? Themselves know it's got to come through this mechanism on a national level. It can't work on, I'm talking about on a collective level. As an individual, it can work back in terms of a double arrow. But as a national level, it can't. It's got to go back from Ummah. You see, but the Ummah has to have enough Tumah, you see, in order to take back that, it has to have enough Tumah which corresponds to the level of Tumah in the Satan to take it back so that it can go back to the Yidden. But if the Ummah Oilam, that Tumah of Klal Yisrael, if all of Klal Yisrael is lost, you see, to the Satan, to a Tumah level which is beyond anything which the Goyim can deliver, then nobody can ever be the representative of the Ummah Oilam. There is no Goy that can hold that Tumah. There's no Goy that can take that all from the Satan and give it back. Why? Because they're higher than the Tumah that the all lies in. Do you see what I'm saying?
The lower.
The higher.
The amount of tumah is more than the goyim.
It's like a formula.
Yes, it's more. The amount of tumah is worse, and the goyim are not as tomei.
It's an equation like a formula.
They're more mesukim. You know, the goyim are more. They're more mesukim. They don't have that degree of hashchosa. You see what I'm saying?
That was the haftorah given.
No, wait a minute. No, forget about the haftorah. Obviously, this must be true from what we've said. Now the challenge is it possible for Klal Yisrael to go down to a level that where there is no goyish level that even has that tumah? The answer is yes, it is. It is true. It can be done. So that is an open flaw in the haftorah of the Bnei Shalom to Klal Yisrael, isn't it? It's a flaw because it's the one escape hatch, right? In which the Satan can swallow Klal Yisrael up and never give them back. You see what I'm saying? Oh. Now, enter a different situation. People, when the Bnei Shalom says to Avram, that I guarantee you that your nation, you see, will achieve Olam Haba, that essentially is the messianic promise. That there will be a Mashiach. There will be a time when the Tikkun of the Bria, right? There will be a time when the Tikkun of the Bria will be established. That is our Tocha. But wait a minute. We see the following. The Baruch Shem said in the Pasuk, Ani Hashem be'ita chishena. Remember we have the old formula? Be'ita chishena. Be'ita refers to Zachu, Maisa, and Achishena refers to what? That's no Zachu. This is Lo Zachu, right? And this is Zachu, Bechira, right? You remember that? You remember this? There are two ways in which the Tikkun can come in the end. Either the Tikkun comes because Klal Yisrael is Zeicha to the Bechira, that's called Kula Zakai Achishena. Then the Yemos Mashiach, which is really the Tikkun, or meaning that all the Uris go back. That's what it means. The Yemos Mashiach is simply the period of time when all the Uris go back to Klal Yisrael from the Tumah. That's what the Yemos Mashiach means. So when the Baruch Shem says, all your Uris will go back to Klal Yisrael, and they will be Mesukkan, either by their own Maisim, because they have the Uris, or else Be'ita, through Yisurin. And this is the Ita process. This is it. This is how it works. They get it back constantly by this triangular approach of the Ummah So'ilim. Do you understand? Oh. Now, Be'ita means another concept. It means that the Baruch Shem says, I will save Klal Yisrael. Even if Klal Yisrael is not Zoicha, even if they're not Zoicha, I will give them their Uris back through this way. You see. And how long will I do it? I will wait to a certain Zman called the Kates. The Kates represents a certain period, a certain time. And what the Baruch Shem says, Olam Hazeh can last for 6,000 years. Fine. The Tachlis of Adam Rishon must be Mekuyim in 6,000 years. All the Uris must have gone back in 6,000 years. You see. But, should Klal Yisrael fail to take it back on their own, then I will give it back by Yisurin. But it cannot go beyond a certain point. That's called the case. There is a certain date, which only the Baruch Shem knows, fundamentally, where by that date, every all will come back. Whether Klal Yisrael worked for it, through Bechira, or worked for Yisurin. That's the deadline. Every all will go back. You see what I'm saying? But that deadline that every all goes back, correct, means that it's going to go back, even if Klal Yisrael goes down to the worst madreg of Hashchosa. You see, the Baruch Shem says, even if Klal Yisrael goes to the worst level of Hashchosa, I guarantee it will go back. You see. Now, as Klal Yisrael approaches the Kates, it means, why hasn't Klal Yisrael been Zeicha to the Gula before the Kates? Because they weren't Zeicha at all. Which means the Hashchosa keeps on interfering with going back. You see. It keeps on interfering. So they go further and further down to the end of the time, and they always have to keep on coming onto this instrument. As Klal Yisrael approaches the Kates, it approaches to the lowest levels of Tumah. You see. In other words, the Baruch Shem requires, in order to save Klal Yisrael, right before the Kates, the Baruch Shem requires an Ummah of the lowest madreg of Tumah, in which the last Uris will go back. You see? It requires that. Because Be'ita means that Klal Yisrael can go on in this Hashchosa and accumulate Hashchosas and Hashchosas all the way to the last day. You see. And the Baruch Shem says, I still will get it back for you. Which means that Klal Yisrael can descend to the worst level of Hashchosa and the worst level of Tumah, and the Baruch Shem says that it doesn't matter. There will be always an Ummah in which you can go into that will give it to you back. That's the Haftocha of Be'ita. You see. Now, where did the Baruch Shem get this Ummah? Okay. Who qualifies for that Ummah? Where does he get it? Let's look at the first Ummah. The first Ummah that Klal Yisrael went into to take back the Uris of the Bria was Mitzrayim. After Avram Yitzchak and Yaakov, Yosef went in. He was several the Yisur in Mitzrayim, made it tzaddik, so he opened up the first bridge. Then all the Jews went into Mitzrayim, and they were there for 210 years. Mitzrayim had the power, the first and the eyes of the entire world from the time of Adam until that time. You see. And the Jews went into Mitzrayim, and by suffering at the hand of Mitzrayim, they took back every ore that Mitzrayim had. They impoverished Mitzrayim. Correct? And you find that in human history itself, after Yetzias Mitzrayim, Egypt went down as a nation after that. Now, it was the intention of the Rebbeinu Shalom, and I've said this many times, it was the intention of the Rebbeinu Shalom that the Gula Rishonah should be the Gula Shlema. That Yetzias Mitzrayim should be the last Gulas. Klal Yisrael should only enter Mitzrayim, be served with Yisurin, and take back all the Uris that are necessary. But what should have happened at Matan Torah, which came right after Yitzhak Mitzrayim was the Yemos Mashiach. The world should have ended right after Matan Torah. That's what the Gemara says. The entire world should have reached its peak, and all the earth should have gone back to the Jews, you see, by the time of Matan Torah. The Chet of the Egel killed it. Because of the Chet of the Egel, they lost it, you see. And the earth were again redistributed out. Okay? When they were redistributed out, where did they go? They didn't go into Mitzrayim anymore. They didn't. They didn't go to Mitzrayim, you see. Because, why? Because Mitzrayim already had lost, but Mitzrayim already became disqualified as the Ummah. It's one side the earth, it did not go back to Mitzrayim. We'll see that in a second. Because Moshe Rabbeinu said, when Moshe said and this is what Moshe meant, when Moshe Rabbeinu said to the Yidden, when they by Kriyas Yamsuf, right? Kikasha risum oisam hayoim, loisoi sifun oid loisam ad oilam. What Moshe was saying, as you see the Egyptians now, you will never see them again. Because he didn't mean that they were about to be destroyed into Yamsuf, physically. He meant you will never again be placed into Egypt. That will never again be the Ummah in which you will have to retrieve Eretz. You will never again go into that Ummah. That's what he said. You see, never again. Why? Basically the following. Do you understand what I'm saying? That's what he meant by Losu Oz. Why is that? Because the answer is this. Who is worse, Yishmael or Esav? Esav is worse. Esav had a greater Kedusha, but Esav was a much bigger Rasha. And because of that, Esav has a much bigger Tumah. You see what I'm saying? Yishmael has a lesser degree of Tumah, and so on. Now, in the beginning of the world, at the time of Matan Torah, the Eretz, because of the hashchos of the world, went into a certain Ummah. The Ummah that was sufficient was Mitzrayim. Because Mitzrayim basically has connections with Yishmael. Mitzrayim had B-level. The world up to that time, the hashchos that accumulated up to that time, was a B level. Yishmael was the Ummah, you see. Yeah, no, but it doesn't matter. Even though only in terms of what they were able to go down to that point. At that point, what it means is that they went down to a level of B, up to a certain level of B. All the hashchot that was accumulated in the world went down to a level called the B level. So it had to go into an ummah where there was a B prime. That was Yishmael. But what happened to Moshe? So Moshe said, you will never again see Mitzrayim. What did Moshe mean? He meant a double message. He meant you will never see Mitzrayim again, not only physically, but you will never see them as an ummah again, in the ummah. Why? Because what Moshe was saying the following: if you blow it again, you will add to the hashchasa, and Mitzrayim will no longer be capable of giving you back your earth, because they don't have that much tumah. You see, you will therefore have to descend into another nation which is worse than Yishmael. You will have to go into Esav. You see? That's what Moshe was saying. You will never see Yishmael Mitzrayim again, because they no longer will have the ability to give you back that koyach, because they don't have that amount of tumah. If you blow it again, if we fail to establish the Yemos Mashiach now, you see, in Matan Torah, because of whatever reason, and that reason of course was the Chet Egel, then you will have added to a new level of Hashchotza, such that it now is on a C level. Well, C Hashchotza requires a C nation. That no longer is Yishmael. We've got to go look further now for a nation that has a much further degree of Tumah. Who has that? We've got to go on to Esav. You see. Okay. And that was the thing. We go into Esav. So what happened was, the earth of Klal Yisrael, after the Chet of the Egel, went into Esav. However, there was one more catch that happened. Right after the Jews left Egypt, right after Egypt, in the Parsha B'Shalach, the Jews became involved with one Ummah, Amalek. Who is Amalek? Amalek is basically the descendants of Esav. Esav had many children, and there are many nations that came from him. One of the great-grandchildren that he had, his name was Amalek. And he had children. Now, who was Amalek at that time? Amalek was one of the children of Esav. He was not necessarily worse than any other children of Esav. Obviously, he had a certain tumah in him, like anyone else. But what happened was, Amalek did something which was staggering. When the Jews left Mitzrayim, every nation in the world knew about what happened, and they were all very frightened by Klal Yisrael. Who would start up with the Jews when their gods fought on their side? They had to be out of your mind. But Amalek came along and says, we don't give a damn. We'll fight against our God even if he destroys us, because better we reign in hell than serve in heaven. Amalek personified the greatest amount of gaiva that is possible, where they said, we don't care, even if we're Masik Yehuda, even if the Baruch Shem, openly demonstrated his koyach, we don't care. We will not submit to his koyach. We will attack Israel and attempt to destroy it, even if we lose. You see, that level of gaiva was so powerful that Amalek, which used to be the station, descended to a new level that has never again been reached or was there before. What level did they descend? The Baruch Shem said the following, the Klal Yisrael. He said the Klal Yisrael the following: whenever you meet an Amaleki, you must kill him, man, woman, and child. You ever answered the question, what kind of mitzvah is that, to kill everyone, man, woman, and child? That's the mitzvah of Amaleki. What kind of thing? That sounds like a cruel thing. I understand if the guy's in any animals. I can understand if the guy if the person is a Russia or the snap or is your enemy, you kill him. But why do you have to kill him? His wives and his kids, everyone. You've got to wipe it out. Mocha timcha zecha Amalek mitach shemayim. You must ultimately entirely destroy the remnant of Amalek, right, in the world. Why? Why is that? The answer is the following: because Amalek entered a sphere which no other man has ever entered. Because of the fact that Amalek demonstrated the greatest gaiva and the greatest riches, they demonstrated the greatest yesh oidnur vadoi that a person can believe. That I will fight God directly on his own. I will fight God. Even worse than the Doha Floga. You see, because in the Doha Floga there was not these nisim, but in the Doha Midbar in Yaakov there was all the nisim, and everyone saw what happened in Mitzrayim, and not to have any fear at all. It's that such gaiva as to go against your own suicide. It was a suicidal impulse almost. It's like a guy, it's mamish a suicidal impulse. The gaiva was so strong as to say, okay, we'll commit suicide. What such a thing did was, it took the nation of Amalek, right, and they suddenly lost every piece of kedusha that they ever had. Every piece of kedusha that they had was totally lost. You see, before they were just one of the Bnei Esav, and they were regular ummah. One of the ummas from the Bnei Esav, right? And they had, they were goyim. You see, they were ben olam hazeh, right? And they had a certain amount of kedusha and a tremendous amount of tumah. That's what characterizes the ummas, right? Correct? But because of what they did, they lost every piece of kedusha they have. You see, what happened? They lost. It means they became dovik to total tumah. Total tumah. What happens to a person that becomes dovik to total tumah? You know what it means? It means he has no shaykhs to bechira anymore. He has no shaykhs to mitzvah. Because he is now a total personification of the Satan in this Bria. An Amaleki is a non-human being. He looks like you and I, and so on to it. But his koyach nefesh is pure tumah. It is pure evil. He doesn't have a good thought in his entire brain. Why? Because he's not capable of having a good thought. Because the Ovos of Amalek at that time did what they did. Every Amaleki who descended from them doesn't have shaykhs to one Ma'aseh Toiv in that sense. And therefore he was like the Nachash in the time of Adam, before the Chet. Adam Rishon before the Chet, the Satan was personified in an animal called the Nachash. The Nachash was not the Satan, but the koyach of Tumah, or Pitoy, of seduction, was in the Nachash. You see, no human being ever had that role, because every human being, even when they were Goyim, they never lost it. They never lost their Kedusha. They were killed, for example, in the Dor HaMabor by Noach. Or they became Goyim, Umas Olam, and they lost like 99% of the Kedusha. But nobody ever lost 100% of his Kedusha. Amalek did. Amalek lost every grain. Which means that Amalek, for practical purposes, has no neshama at all. It has no shaykhs to a Yetzer Tov. It is a being who only has a Yetzer Hara. You see what I'm saying? It is a direct personification in human form of the koyach of the Satan in its bria. That's why the Baruch Shem says you must wipe it out, because it has no koyach itself. Amalek has no tachlis anymore, because Amalek is not even a ben olam hazeh. You went from a ben olam haba to a ben olam hazeh, but there was never a person that was not even a ben olam hazeh. Amalek as an ummah is not even a ben olam hazeh anymore. It has no shaykh to anything but pure tumah. You see. As such, it became the nation which was totally dovik to Tumah. That's why the Baruch Shem says that you must kill them. Every man, woman, and child. But wait a minute. Once Amalek became a nation that was totally dovik to Tumah, the escape hatch was closed. Why? Because you cannot get more tumah than an Amaleki. So now, if Klal Yisrael can go down to the worst madregas of Ashchasa, and there will always be Amalek to catch it. You see? And Amalek, by being persecuting Klal Yisrael, will give it back. That was the thing. You see what I'm saying? That's why, you see what happens then? Amalek therefore became the nation with the lowest madrig of Tumah, the Z level. So that Klal Yisrael went down to the level of Z, there was another ummah that corresponds to that called Amalek. And how is that? Because they have total tumah. But you may ask, if they have total tumah, right? You still need a certain amount of kedusha in order to hold your earth of Klal Yisrael. The answer is they do. From where did they get their kedusha from? From Esav.
They lost every grain of it.
They lost every grain in terms of themselves, in terms of their own bechira. But they have a superficial surface of kedusha that comes from Esav that allows the earth of Klal Yisrael to attach itself. You see, it's a surface covering. It has no shaykhs to the pneumius. Every person in the world has an alien of kedusha in his pneumius. You see, his pneumius means in his nefesh he has some kedusha. Everyone, every living person except an Amaleki. An Amalekite has no kedusha in his nefesh at all, in the pneumius. He only has it on the surface, on the chitzonius. You see, so Amalek is therefore the perfect ummah that can save Klal Yisrael, even if Klal Yisrael goes down to the wire, down to the end. You see, if the Yemot Mashiach ends in a photo finish, Amalek is the one who's going to be there. Why? Why is that? Because Amalek has every requirement. It has the lowest madreg of Tumah, so it can take the earth of Klal Yisrael down to the lowest madreg, it can swallow that up, and it has a surface layer of Kedusha, which it got from Amalek or Esav, which allows it to hold it. But it itself has no Kedusha from its pneumius. That's why Amalek has no shaykhs at all to what? Amalek has no shaykhs at all to Kedusha and has no shaykhs to Bechira. Because it cannot even be Ben Olam Hazeh. You have to remember, even if Ben Olam Hazeh, which is the Goyish nation, gets Olam Hazeh through Bechira. You see, when there's an Indian of Nam Sufa, that means that the Neshama, the Nefesh of a Goy, still has certain aspects of Bechira, which means that it has a certain way of gaining more and more Kedusha on its own level. But once you have no Kedusha at all, you lose that entirely. You lose all your Bechira. So you're like, it's like a robot. An Amalekite is like a zombie, which is totally controlled by the Yetzer Hara. The only one who has Bechira is someone who has a Yetzer Hara and a Yetzer Toiv. Or else you have no Bechira if you don't have two different alternatives, right? If you only have a Yetzer Hara and there's no alternatives, there's no Bechira. You're a zombie, you are the personification of the army of the Sitra Achra to the degree that's unmanageable. So therefore, since an Amalekite has no Bechira, he's not an Odom. He has no shaykh to being an Odom anymore. If he has no shaykh to being an Odom, Mochat Simcha Zech Amalek.
Which
Amalek would be erased from Ganzen.
Who?
Amalek is like the bottom pit.
He is the bottom pit.
Accepts everything. So if all the Malaikim would cease to exist, then who would absorb? In other words, if they're the lowest, then there wouldn't be a lowest anymore.
That answers the question. If Shlomo Timko, why is it Midol Adar? That's why is it...
I mean, if you destroy them, there won't be a yeah.
So who would absorb the
Excellent, very good question. If there's a mitzvah essay, Mochat Simcha Zech Amalek, and you destroy the Amalekites, then you're back to the old story again.
That's why it's
Excellent question. And we will proceed to answer this, and you will understand something which is a very strange thing about the whole inyan of Mochat Simcha Zech Amalek. What that mitzvah essay is. But we all understand everything up to now. Okay? We understand who can be the Ummah. We understand that there's got to be an Ummah which goes down to the deepest level of Ashchas to take it back. And Amalek now fits the bill. Okay, we understand what Moshe said to Klal Yisrael, Yishmael no longer has shaykh to that. It cannot do it anymore on that level. You see, if you blow it now, you're going to go down to a low level Ashchasa, you got to get to a deep Ummah. You see, it happened to be that Amalek supplied this thing. Okay, Amalek is the safety valve for Klal Yisrael. And I say this, were it not for the fact of Amalek, there could not be a Yeshua for Klal Yisrael. You see it yourself. It's an amazing thing. I'm saying an incredible statement. Were it not for the fact that it was a Amalek, then the Baruch Hashem could never guarantee to Avom that there will be a tikkun. When the Baruch Hashem says, "Umevi goy levnei v'neihem," that I will save Klal Yisrael, afilu be'ita, it was on the condition that there was an ummah like Amalek. You see, were it not for Amalek, then Klal Yisrael would be nevad. If they go down to the wire. of a Brita, down to the Ikvis Meshicha. If they go down to the wire, down to the Kates, they will have accumulated so much Hashchosa that they need another Ummah which can parallel that Hashchosa. And if Amalek wasn't there would be no such Ummah. And Christ will be totally swallowed in by the Sitrach or by the Din. That's the statement that we understand now. It's an incredibly paradoxical statement. That what Amalek saves the Jews.
That gives sense to the
And they save them by trying to kill them. It's exactly like the Sultan. That's the inverse. You think you're going to destroy the Jews? In the very act that you're going to try and destroy the Jews, Amalek, you now become the agents to save the Jews.
Unwitting agents.
Unwitting agents. So it's an amazing thing. You are now the hope of mankind. You're the hope of the Bria, Amalek. Me the connected. Well, it's in that sense. Yeah. The staggering thing. Amalek, the Jew really goes to Amalek and says, Amalek, in a certain sense, you can say, you are the hope of mankind. No, it's true. You are the hope. Well, not for the fact that you are such a mushchas and that you're such a rasha, then the whole Bria Chas V'Shalom can be nervad. Because there's no way to retrieve it. There's no way that the Hanoch Yichud can work to save the world. You see. It's unfortunate that you're the guy that you have to do it, Idiot, who told you to become such a chayta, But you thought that by being such a chayta, you would destroy Klal Yisrael. You thought that by destroying the Jews, you destroy the Kabbon of the Banisham to bring about Olam Haba. It is you who will bring about Olam Haba. You are the ones now that become the shliach to bring about Olam Haba. It's such a clear example of the Hanoch Yichud, the way it works on its head. Turns out the whole situation. And that's the meaning of the Yichud Shlitasa, the Banisham. You see, that you cannot get around the Banisham. You can't confuse him, or circumvent him, or frustrate him. On the contrary, if you try and frustrate him, your very efforts becomes the ways that he ultimately gets it.
The more you frustrate, the more you Mekayim.
The more your very act of frustration is an act of being Mekayim as Rotzen. You see, that is the essence of Hanoch Yichud. Yichud Shlitasai. You see, Einoid Mulvadoi. There is nothing but him. It's hidden. It's hidden. That's why it's so hidden, because it's the inverse. That's why the Hanoch Yichud is so hidden. Because the Hanoch Yichud takes place in all the attempts to undo the Kvotzen HaBorei. Where? Eif Tzor Yaakov Umimena Yivashea. From the Tzor itself comes the Yeshua. From the Amalek comes the Yeshua of the Bria. You see. Another classic example of it in that sense.
If things get down to the case, that means that that's the worst possible situation.
Yes, yeah, sure. Because it means the Banishim cannot save Klal Yisrael its own. It means that Klal Yisrael is constantly losing its Uris. And it's got to wait till the case itself to do it. That means they're not doing it on the Bechira. They got to be doing it on Yisurin. They're accumulating more and more Hashchosas. It's staggering after a while what the Hashchosas is in Tom. So that's the Banishim's got to get the Ummah down to the bottom that can do it. And that's the Amalek. Oh. Now, let's tie it up here. And now let's understand something about current events. In a very interesting kind of thing. In a very strange way. 1 second.
What happened to his question?
I'm going to get to his question. Let me get to the question that was asked is, if there's a mitzvah essay to wipe out Amalek, then the Banishim is saying to Klal Yisrael, destroy your insurance policy. And in fact, that's what you're asking. The Banishim is saying to Klal Yisrael, destroy your own insurance policy. How can I do that? Rip up the fire insurance, or the life insurance. That's suicide. What the Banishim means is the following. You have a mitzvah essay to destroy Amalek. You know why you have a mitzvah essay to destroy Amalek? You have a mitzvah essay to destroy Amalek because Amalek is a non-human. And therefore he's a total danger to the Bria, in that terms. But there's another catch. The other catch is the following. The ability that you will have to destroy Amalek depends on you. In other words, the following. When you are tzaddikim, then what happens is you don't need them. You can destroy them. They have no koiches then, because they have none of your iris. Then you can makayim the mitzvah. But if you become a shoyim, you give them your iris. They then have shlita on you, and you can't touch them. You see? So your ability to destroy them depends on you. That's fundamentally what it is. That's why when the Banishim... that's it. The mitzvah, when the Banishim said it's your mitzvah to destroy Amalek, what the Banishim is saying is the only way you can destroy Amalek is if you're tzaddikim. Because if you're tzaddikim and you're Hayam Madrega, they will have absolutely no iris.
That's exactly the way the Muhammad Amalek went.
And that's exactly, Rofi Yodayim.
but they were Kavanah, the Hashem, the Venus Mishmar.
Exactly. And Rashi says that when Amalek came over there, it was called freedom. When Amalek went to war with Klal Yisrael, right after in Bishalach there, it says there were places called freedom. Why? Because it says there, Rashi says that the reason why Amalek was able to run after Klal Yisrael is because they became nisrashal, they became weak on learning Torah. They became weak on learning Torah. And because they became weak, because Yaakov became weak, Esav, who was Amalek in the sense, became stronger, you see, in that sense. That's why the koyach of Amalek depends on the koyach of Klal Yisrael. The ability to become the mitzvah's essay of Mocha Timcha depends on how big tzaddik and Klal Yisrael are.
Same thing happened in the time of David and Melech.
Who?
They didn't kill the Shaul Melech, whatever. They didn't kill.
Also,
because they were on such a high madriga.
Why
didn't you want to kill him?
Yeah, obviously he couldn't kill him. There's a number, I don't want to go into the whole thing, but obviously he was supposed to, but he didn't. He had Rachmanis in him, which means that the kitzuk was so high that it was able to put in, it was able to save one, obviously in that sense. But obviously you can see how close Klal Yisrael came to the Gula.
Yes.
That shows you really. In many ways, depending on where Amalek is holding, that shows you where you're holding in the Gula. You see, because Amalek is the barometer of how healthy Klal Yisrael is.
But it doesn't mean that it's a case at that time.
Well, yes, it is in a sense, but it's an Achishenik case.
Because you might move to level C to level B.
Yes,
or level A.
but it's an Achishenik. It's not the real case. No, there's only one case. But it was a critical point in the time of Klal Yisrael that they could have bought the Gula and they failed. You see, which is symbolized in the inability to kill Amalek. In that sense. Okay. Now let's put it together. If you'll notice in the pasuk says over there, "Ki yar Hashem al case car." That's what the pasuk says. The Banishim says, and Rashi says, the Banishim said to Moshe, it's as if the Banishim says, I put my hand on my own throne. Ki yar Hashem al case car. I put my hand on my own throne, and I swear, you see, that Amalek will be destroyed. You see, now there's an aleph missing on Kisei. There's an aleph missing, and that aleph represents Echad. That's the word Kisei is not Nishlam. The letter Aleph is missing. The Aleph there is the word Echad, or the unity. What it means is the following. That what the Banishim is saying is the following. That if Klal Yisrael does Chatoyim, then they lose their Kedusha. If they lose their Kedusha, then what do they lose? They lose their Teferes and their Oiz. You see, where does the Teferes and Oiz go? The Hatzloch and the Chochmah? It goes into an Amalek. The Oiz go to Amalek. If Amalek has the Oiz of Klal Yisrael, then it has Teferes and Oiz. Remember, you see, if it has Teferes and Oiz, it means that the Hasogas Yichud of the Bria is Mechusa. You see what I'm saying? The ability to see Yichudoi, the ability to see, this is a critical point here, the ability to see Yichudoi, or the inner pattern of the world, the ability of Klal Yisrael to reach the highest level of Chokhmah, to see the inner handwork of the Baruch Shalom, you see, depends on if it has all its Uris. If it has all its Kedusha, then it's able to see its Teferes. It can see the inner framework, the inner pattern of history, and the inner pattern of all existence. But if it loses those Uris, it loses the ability of Chokhmah. You see, where does it go to? It goes to Amalek. Then Amalek now has this koyach of Oiz and Teferes. Now, what does that mean? It means that the ability of Klal Yisrael to be Masi Yechudoi is deficient. You see what I'm saying? That's why the Aleph is missing. What the Banishim is saying is the following, that as long as Amalek exists, he exists because he has the Oiz of Klal Yisrael. And as long as he has the Oiz of Klal Yisrael, the world will always be missing a Madrega of Hasagas Yechudoi. The world will always be in a level of a Yeshua Mavadoi, you see, of Hefta. That's the barometer. That's what the Banishim says. When the Banishim said that Klal Yisrael must destroy Amalek, what the Banishim saying the following: when Klal Yisrael gets to the Madrega, that it is capable of destroying Amalek, it means Amalek has absolutely no more Oiris left. If Amalek has no Oiris left, it means that Klal Yisrael has all of its Oiris. If Klal Yisrael has all of its Oiris, then it's Zoichet to be Masi Yechudoi to fully, which is the Yemais Mashiach, and then the Aleph is restored. Do you see what I'm saying? That's the Indian of Amalek. Amalek is the barometer of the health of Klal Yisrael. The spiritual health of Klal Yisrael is determined by Amalek.
Well,
you see?
Amalek keep on expressing?
Well, I say we're going to say that. By Amalek, it's the barometer which expresses the health of Klal Yisrael and the health of the Bria. In other words, since Amalek is the last nation, you see, it's the last nation. If Klal Yisrael goes down to the last point, those Oiris will be in an Amalek. If they're in Amalek, they have to be retrieved. Amalek is the last place where these Uris must come back from. Therefore, the world cannot be complete until Amalek ceases to exist as such. Do we all understand this? This is fundamentally the relationship between Amalek and Klal Yisrael that was set up over there by Refidim. You see, Amalek is the insurance policy that if Klal Yisrael gets down to a Be'ita, it can pull back its koyach. From where? From Amalek himself. You see, it is also the insurance policy that Klal Yisrael will pull back the koyach and be zoicha to the full madrega of Asogah Zichudoi, which it has in Yemei Mashiach, which therefore means that Amalek has nothing, and now in Yemei Mashiach, Klal Yisrael can be zoicha to the mitzvah of Mocha Timcha Zech Amalek. You see what I'm saying? That's the connection. Now, interestingly enough, let's now look, once we understand this, that Amalek is now the repository, Esav, first Esav and then Amalek, you see. You have to remember, Amalek is not the total repository. Amalek is only the repository when you get down to Z. Normally it's not used. Amalek is the insurance policy. What normally is used as the backup, what normally is used as the backup to Klal Yisrael is Esav. And the worst part of Esav is Amalek. Amalek is the worst part of Esav, which is the zero level down here. It's the bottom level of Z Kazan, the Z prime. Okay? But it's not used. Only in the end is it used in such a vast scale. You see, normally Esav is used. We're holding in 1984. We're holding very close to the Ikvus. We are in what's called the Ikvus Mashiach and so on. Somehow we've gotten very close to the case, and we haven't managed to really bring back the world in an Achishena to Yemot Mashiach and Achishena, right? Which means that the level of Ashchosa is very, very profound. The Uris must be scattered to Amalek in the highest degree. Correct? It therefore would be predictable that in order for Klal Yisrael to begin the process of Geula, they have to become consumed by the nation which can hold the highest level of what? Of Tumah. And what nation is that? Amalek. So Klal Yisrael to get back its Uris at the end of time, which is now, towards the Yemot Mashiach, right? Right? Means that they got to go into Amalek totally. You see, it's not enough for Klal Yisrael simply to interface with certain aspects of Amalek. But essentially the entire group of Klal Yisrael has to go into the group of Amalek and be eaten. You see, that can only take place as we get to the end, Be'ita. Do you see why? You all understand why? Because Amalek is the lowest madriga. You only have to come on to the lowest madriga of Tumah when Klal Yisrael is on the lowest madriga of Ashchosa. And that only happens if we got to go down to the wire, which is the case. You see? So therefore we can predict, very basically to say, that the Gula cannot start, or we cannot have shaykhs to any Gula, you see, unless if we go, Klal Yisrael goes into Amalek, if we go down to the case. Dar Ita. Now I asked you, has such a thing happened?
Yes.
Where? Wait a minute.
That,
the Holocaust.
The nation.
The Holocaust was that. In order to bring back the Uris which are necessary to start the Gula process. What was the thing immediately that happened after the Holocaust? Eretz Yisrael. You see, in order just to start this kind of thing, you see, Klal Yisrael had to descend and bring back all the Uris from the deepest level of Tumah. They had to go into the Guf of Amalek. You see, what's the Guf of Amalek? Basically, Germany. We identify Amalek as basically the German nation and its counterparts. Doesn't mean that every German is an Amaleki, but fundamentally the koyach of Nefesh, which corresponds Hitler, by Hitler, the koyach corresponds to the Amalek, generally lies with the German people. You see, do we understand this? That is the Indian of the Holocaust, and that is why such a Holocaust is happening now and not before. You see, we explain two things. One, what?
It's a Gemara in
Geramnia,
Megillah about Germany.
Yeah.
Oh, it says that the
Well,
Amalek.
it says Geramnia. And then I think there's a golf from the Dain or the Yai, but it says I feel Germania out of
Yeah, out of your
something like that.
You're saying that.
There's Geramnia, right?
It says Malchus Edom, and the pasuk Gilu Yotzim Akrivim is Kol Olam Kula.
Yeah.
Hmm.
But we see this thing. We now understand the concept of why there is a Holocaust, number one, fundamentally, and why such a thing can only happen now, not before. You see, we understand why Klal Yisrael will only interact in a major way with Amalek only at the end. It can only act the way it acts at the end, you see. Because that's where it is, you see. Because it's not necessary to interact with Amalek only until the end, you see. But obviously, if it goes down to the wire to the end, then it must come in contact with Amalek, you see. Goy b'kerev goy. There has to be an achil of Klal Yisrael by Amalek himself. And that achil restores the earth that go down to the lowest level of Haskota, which obviously would have accumulated if they go down to the wire, to the Vita.
So what's not to say that Chaz Hashem, I think like this cannot happen again?
Well, because it's not. Because hold on 1 second. One second. Well, 1 second. How do we also know? Remember, we have another aspect to also know. If Amalek, you see, you have to know what's the structure of an Amaleki. The structure of Amaleki is a nefesh, which is pure tumah, with a veneer or a surface of kedusha, in order to be able to hold the kedusha of Klal Yisrael. That's the structure of the nefesh in Amaleki. We understand that? Now, obviously, since Amalek has the highest degree of tumah, you see, he has to hold Klal Yisrael down to its highest degree of tumah, which means that Klal Yisrael will be losing vast amounts of verse to an Amalekite, right? It means Amalek possesses, down towards the end, tremendous amounts of what? Of Tferes and Oiz. Do you see that in the Germination? You do. Isn't that strange? The greatest musicians in the world, and the greatest scientists in the world, and the greatest philosophers generally tend to be Germans.
After the war,
The German Chachamim, the German musicians, I don't want to recount, for example, the culture of Germany is tremendous in terms of its Tferes and Oiz. And the Hatzlach is music. You see, the ability to build an army which can then conquer the world twice is incredible. Where do you get that kind of an oiz? You see, that one nation go against Britain, France, or the whole Europe is on, Spain, Portugal. I mean, it's incredible. One nation is able to go with their army, just take over all of Western Europe. Is staggering. You see, and what not for some of the stupid blunders that they did in World War II. Certain things, Dunkirk and opening up the Russian front, they could have conquered the entire continent of Asia and Europe without problems. And at that point, they could have handled the American threat. You see, there was certain strategic possibilities. Obviously, the tremendous koyach that Germany was doing miyasek Klal Yisrael. Germany was losing its koyach at the same time. So they were losing, they were eating themselves up.
Because the Irish were leaving.
What?
There's a book by Lucy Davidowitz.
Yeah, Davidowitz, that's the famous town, yeah.
That shows that if the Germans were not intent on doing what they were doing to the Jews, they could have won the war.
Yes.
What they were doing was actually physically draining their entire
Because the
economy.
Irish were leaving.
Which brings up right. They point out about Germany and meant what you're pointing out. It's a very strange thing. Is that Hitler was obsessed with killing Jews. Even when they came and said, "Look, we need trains to supply the troops and so on," he said, "No, I don't want any of the trains taken away from Auschwitz." It's like he felt in his entire being that his entire tachlis and the whole structure called Germany, the German arms, was to destroy the Jews, even though it means we'll lose the war. Which was Amalek. That's an Amaleki. That's exactly what Amaleki is about. Yeah, that's the teva. That's the trait of an Amaleki. Go after the Jew, even though it's suicide. You see.
Like he committed to.
He committed suicide. Well, okay, yeah, that's right, literally. Okay, but that's what the thing is on. And we find also that Germany has tremendous koiches.
They were
You see.
Mitzvah until 1941, and actually in the 1940s they really started killing the Jews. They only were...
Well, there's a slow build-up on it.
But
Now, there were other ummahs also that shaykh to these koiches. The other thing also, not so posh, the others were distributed in Japan. There were a lot of interesting things also. But fundamentally, you see, interesting thing. There's another thing fundamental also, that if you look at the Ummah Sa'olam again, so therefore, when Germany destroyed the Jews, and Germany was successful, in the sense that Germany destroyed all of European Jewry. 1,000 years of Jewish culture, of Ruchnius, was wiped out by Germany in 5 years. She wasn't matzliach in destroying the Jews because she couldn't, but she wiped out that entire civilization, which was known as European Jewry. You see, when she did that, she impoverished herself, and she was bankrupt with Eretz. She was almost bankrupt with Eretz. That's why at the end of the war she was split between East and West. Her whole koyach was split and so on. However, a strange thing happened. You notice that Germany is still getting strong and so on. Why? Because again, Amalek is always the guarantee for the Bria. Which means, you know, Amalek is like a puppet. that, you know what it is? It's like Amalek has no bechira. You must understand, Hitler had no bechira. Hitler had no more bechira in killing Jews than one of the Malach HaChavola has to run after a Jew. You mean, he's an agent of the Sultan. That's his whole tachlis, and so on. Now, you can't take something like that and destroy it. You can take something like Mitzrayim and destroy it, because there's a certain amount of bechira involved, when you talk about an Adam, you see. But when you talk about a robot, you can't punish a robot for being a robot. You have to use the robot over and over again. So even though Germany impoverished itself in a sense, and suddenly became a very weak robot, it still is necessary to continue on, so that the Gul of Klal Yisrael continues. You see. So the Hatzlacha has to again be rejuvenated and so on. You see, it has like a Tchias HaMesim in spite of itself. You know, it's like it's used by the Bnei Shalom and then reused and reused. You know, it's like reused plastic containers. You throw it into the garbage. You know, they undo it, and you know what do they call that again? Recycling. Amalek is a recycled substance in a sense. You see, because the amazing thing is the following: normally, an ummah that has no shaykhs kedusha had no kedusha at all. She had no shaykh to chokhmah or no shaykh to Tzeres HaOyz. Remember, what distinguishes the 70 nations, right, is their shaykh to kedusha. The nations which are on the bottom are very primitive in Oyz and Tzeres, because they have very little kedusha, machmas themselves, by themselves. You see, if you examine the culture of the nations from 0 to 40, they're much more primitive than the cultures of, let's say, 40 to 70. Why? Because since the kochas and nefesh have much less kedusha, they have much less an ability to be matzliach or to have chokhmah. Hence, those cultures will be vastly more primitive. You see, we won't go into or describe what those cultures could possibly be, but we can imagine the most primitive cultures on earth are the ones that are contained in the ummas in these levels. Now, an Amalekite is a nation that should be below the most primitive. So, an Amalek machmas itself should have no shaykh to Oyz first. You see, it has no ability to sustain itself. Amalek is a pure and total parasite. It can only live when Jews give it its koyach. It is the total counterpart to Klal Yisrael. What? It's a parasite. It has no ability to sustain itself. You see, if without Klal Yisrael, Amalek would instantly die, just evaporate, because it has no kedusha to give its koyach at all. The only kedusha it has comes from where? From Klal Yisrael. Oh, but that's the thing. But when it gets the kedusha from Klal Yisrael, suddenly what should be a non-entity suddenly becomes a super entity. It becomes a Germany with the greatest scientists, the greatest philosophers, a Goethe, you know, a Beethoven and a Brahms and a Bach and so on and so forth. And down the line, the greatest scientists all which come from Germany, you see. A Max Planck, the greatest of the Chachamatom, it all comes from Germany. So Amalek is an ummah which is either a 0 or is a billion. It cannot be in between. You see what I'm saying? Because it doesn't live on its own koiches. It lives on the koiches of Klal Yisrael, which means that when it lives as a Superman. And if it doesn't live, it lives as nothing. There is no in between. Only the Ummah Olam have the capacity to be in between, because they have something called their own kedusha, which determines their own culture. Besides the fact that it's inflated, if they're one of the Ummah Olam, Amalek can only exist when it's inflated, and it's inflated by Klal Yisrael. Without that inflation, it cannot survive. When it is inflated, it is inflated to a super large degree. That's the characteristic of Amalek, and that's mamish the characteristic of Germany. You see, that basically is, to a certain extent, I think, one of the fundamental definitions or explanations of what the Holocaust was all about. Not only what the Holocaust was serving in that sense, but why the Holocaust had to take place now, and why in a nation like Germany. Because one of the things that people always say is, how can a nation, one of the fundamental questions they ask about Germany was the most advanced civilization. How can a nation with such advanced civilization do such an incredible cruelty? That's what they all say. The answer is obvious. The reason why they can do it cruelty, because the civilization they had was no indication at all about the Kirchhoff and the Panemius. The whole reason why there was such an advanced situation is because there were an incredible mushchasim and tumah in the first place. You see what I'm saying? You see the fallacy? The fallacy is that we think that because the advanced civilization of Germany was such that it should have indicated a higher moral quality to Germany. No, it's fakir. It's because Amalek had no moral quality that there was such an advanced civilization. Because that advanced civilization was an inflation that came from the Tferes of Klal Yisrael.
So why after the Holocaust wasn't that enough we get back all the idols from Amalek, so
Alright, that's a different share.
there's a Muhammad like the Amalek also.
Yeah, it always goes on. But the point is, what I'm simply saying, it was enough to start the process. Now, we have to go on to what I'd like to go on to next time. We've covered a lot of material today, a lot of very, very important material. A lot of principles of human history and Amalek and the whole thing. I mean, we see the patterns of Mitzrayim to Amalek to Germany to the Holocaust, you see, to the whole concept of Be'it Achishena. We've tied in many, many concepts and seen how it applies to current events. You see. What I'd like to go into next time, which is very critical to understand, what could the Jews do to deserve a Zazach? Fine, all this sounds nice. It's an instant mechanism and so on. But my God, what does a Jew have to do to get down to Z? That's what we want to know. What is, in heaven's name, what is Z? What is Z? Such that an Amaleki is necessary to save him. What can a Jew do that the Baruch Shem has to take Amalek, or the essence of Tumah, to be Matzah Klal Yisrael?
And especially in Europe and Germany.
And especially in Europe, with Europe was filled with Ruchnias. That we will investigate next time. Yeah. Well, what we're gradually doing very subtly is building up the picture from inside. If you notice, like from last week, from inside, trying to see some pattern of development in some of the movements of history. And since we live in a time now which is heralded in Yeshiva and so on, we're trying to understand a great deal of what's going on now by virtue of a lot of these patterns of principles. And that was the entire last discussion. We did a great deal last time in terms of outlining some of the fundamental principles of what's going. We're going to speak about that, modify some of that, and we're going to go on and so on. And I don't know if I'll get to the other topic I want to speak tonight about. Why is it that it takes so long to get to the Geula? What is Ma'achad the Geula every day? You know, where is that always going and so on? And maybe I'll start that tonight, or whatever the situation is, but I want to just go on to some of more of the patterns. Just very briefly, last week we established again the critical pattern. Again, we come back to the triangle of Yisrael, the Satan, and Umas Olam, and we all know this again. I won't have to repeat it about the way this triangle essentially works. And last week we spoke fundamentally about what are the criteria which determine which of the Umas Olam serves as the Shaliach of the Satan at any point in time in order to give back Klal Yisrael its Olis. Right? And we spoke about the notion that these Umas Olam have to be in some way in this Arab with the nefesh of Esav and Yishmael, because they have the proper amount of Kedusha in which to draw the Kedusha of Klal Yisrael and hold it. And then finally, what we really went into a great deal was the concept of that there is a continuum of a degree in terms of that the Ummah Sa'olam, the particular Ummah which is chosen to become the repository of the Oros of Klal Yisrael, has to reflect the level of Chet that Klal Yisrael descends. You see. And we'll draw that again. This is the level of Chet or Hashchosa that Klal Yisrael is at. And this represents the level represents essentially the Kochas of Nefesh of the Ummah, the particular Ummah which is chosen. And this essentially varies according to the arrow that goes down varies according to the level of Hashchosa, and the arrow here that goes down varies according to the level of Tumah degree. Tumah. We understand this, remember? And what we explained basically was that there must always be a corresponding Ummah to characterize the level of Hashchosa that Klal Yisrael goes into. Let's see. And that's where we draw on the whole significance of Amalek. That when Moshe Rabbeinu said about Mitzrayim, which was the first real Ummah that was chosen to become the repository of Klal Yisrael, let's say at point B, right? Now you have to remember, when we talk about the earth of Klal Yisrael, we not only talk about the earth of Klal Yisrael itself, but we speak about the earth of the entire world. You see, you have to remember one thing, that Klal Yisrael, the Shalichus of Klal Yisrael is not only for itself. When the Rebbeinu Shem said to the Yidden, he said that you Jews will have fundamentally two functions. You see, the two functions of a Jew is symbolized by what the Rebbeinu Shem said, Va'atem tiyu li mamlechas am segula and mamlechas kahanim. Am segula means a chosen nation or a unique nation, and mamlechas kahanim means a kingdom of priests. Now these constitute as fundamentally two different aspects of the function of Klal Yisrael. Klal Yisrael most basically is an am segula. What is an am segula? You are my chosen nation. What does that mean, you're my chosen nation? It means you are the ones that carry on the tachlis of Adam Rishon. I have constructed the entire Bria because of you. You see, just like once I constructed the entire Bria because of Adam Rishon, who failed, I now have constructed the entire Bria because of you. And you represent what I want to achieve in Hatava. You are my Hatava. You are the ones that I want to go to Olam Haba. That's the concept of an Am Segula. You're the chosen people in that sense. What? I'm sorry. Goy Kodesh. Yeah, I'm sorry. Am Segula also, but Goy Kodesh. The Lashon, no, well, the correct Lashon is Goy Kodesh. You are a Goy Kodesh. You are a holy nation.
Am Segula somewhere?
Doesn't it? I think it's Am Segula.
Not over there.
Not over there. Yeah, Chanim and Goy Kodesh. Yeah, the better Lashon is Am Segula refers to that, but Goy Kodesh is the Lashon. Goy Kodesh meaning you are a holy nation. What do you mean you are a holy nation? It means your entire tachlis lays in what? In the development of kedusha for the purposes of zdichoch. You see, whose basic aspect is to raise the world to a level of Olam Haba. That's the whole chashivas of kedusha. The whole chashivas of ruchnius and kedusha. You see, to be mekadosh the bria and raise the entire world into a mamlechas, into a Olam Haba. But you are also a mamlechas kahanim. You're a nation of priests. Meaning what? Meaning that fundamentally you have to serve also as the bearer, you see, of the difficulties of the world. You're a nation of priests. You're the oidim for the entire bria. You're not only supposed to be a goy kodesh in terms of raising yourself to the level of Olam Haba, but you've got to raise everyone else who is shayach to the level of Olam Haba. You see what I'm saying? Which means a very strange thing. That the top of the Klal Yisrael, in relative to the Ummah Ha'olam, or to the damage that everyone else does, is that Klal Yisrael has to be not only choyzer their oris if they lose it, but they have to be choyzer the oris of the entire bria. You see, that's the unique connection that Klal Yisrael has with everyone else. Okay, and this is the thing. When the Yidden went into Mitzrayim, you can say, well, what chatoim were they being miskaper on? Why did they have to go into Ummah Ha'olam to retrieve their oris? What oris? Was the whole Shibud of Mitzrayim their oris alone? You see what I'm saying? No. It wasn't only their oris. It was the oris of the entire world from the time of Adam Rishon up to that time that was lost because of the chatoim and ashchosa of mankind as a whole. You see, which is in the door of the Mabul and the door of the Haflaga, all the doors since that time. And Klal Yisrael had to represent, they had to bear the masa, not only of their own chatoim, but the masa of the entire the gam and the bria that everyone did. That's a double function, you see. Now, this double function is very critical. Why? Because it is possible to lose one of these functions. It is possible. It is possible to lose the function of a mamlechas kahanim. It is. If a Jew becomes that bad, or if Yidden becomes so bad, it is possible that they will lose the aspect of Mamlech Kahanim. Now let me explain. Bear in mind that the Haftorah that the Rebbeinu Shem gave, right? That the Haftorah the Rebbeinu Shem gave to Avram, you see, was most fundamentally the Haftorah of the Goy Kodesh. From you will emanate the Zerah who will finally achieve Olam Haba. You see. But that your zera necessarily, or all your zera, will be involved in saving the entire bria is an additional factor that they have to be zoche to. It's an additional factor they have to be zoche to. Now, I asked you the question: which Jews lost the ability of Mamlechas Kahanim, but retained the aspect of Goy Kodesh? according to one shita. Is a machlokes really. But which Jews? Do you have any idea? It happened in the history of Jews. In fact, it was the first destructive aspect in the history of Jews where there was a segment of Jews that lost the ability to be a Ma'afakana.
The firstborn.
Who?
The firstborn.
No. No.
But Egel, after the Egel, the Dar
No, because they went on. They went on as Jews, and they went on in the Bria. You want to see the fifth part? No. Who? Yes. The Aseret HaShvatim, the 10 lost tribes. What is the meaning of the Aseret HaShvatim? Really? Well, there's a machlokes, and really what happened to them. There's a shita that holds what happened to them is that they were taken away by, I think Asurbanipal. They were taken away by the Assyrians and brought into exile, and they were absorbed by the Assyrians in some other ummah. Now there's a machlokes in terms of whatever happened to them. There's medrashim and there's tales and elder adon and so on, that they still exist and they've retained their identity in some unknown corner of the earth. That's the whole thing. That's the tradition. That's the meaning of the Sambatyon. The Sambatyon, that you can't get to them, because the river is like throws of stones, except on Shabbos, and then but you can't travel on Shabbos. So they kind of got it coming and going in that way and so on. But the point is, and there were people who've come back. Elder Hadoni, there were people in Jewish history that have come back and says, one of the Ruveni, I don't know, some people that have always come out traveled back, and they've stated that they come from the Aseret HaShvatim, and so on. Now,
scientifically.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I don't know what's on. There's one theory and so on. But so according to the shita that the Aseret HaShvatim have retained their identity, according to that shita, basically, they've lost fundamentally what? If they've retained their identity, the other shita says that they were dispersed in the Ummah Sa'olam, and they were absorbed in the Ummah Sa'olam, and we don't even know who they are. They're totally assimilated. That's another aspect. But according to either shita, what happened to them? They are no more on the face of the earth. You see, they are no longer on the face of the earth. They've disappeared from the entity called the Jew. You can't identify them as Israel, because where are they? If they're somewhere in the river Sambatyon, nobody sees them. And if they're assimilated among the Goyim, nobody sees them anymore. They've lost the entire tzur appearance, the manifest appearance of being Yisrael. You see, which means that they've retained the aspect of a Goy Kaddish, in a certain sense, but they've learned the aspect of Mamlachat Kahanim. What do I mean? They were absorbed in Ummah Sa'olam, or they're in a separate place. It means that they now have, their job is to try and rectify their own chatoim. These were the Jews that did the chait of Yerovam ben Nevat. They were part of the Egel of Yerovam ben Nevat and the whole thing. So the Baruch Hashem says, I've had it, I'm going to take the entire Aseret HaShvatim and disperse them among the Ummahs and hide them forever. You see, until the Yemais Mashiach. You see, what the Baruch Hashem says he did was, he said, you now will be occupied in retrieving your own Oris. That's it. Your own Oris. You'll have your own Avodah. If you're over Sambatim, they were Fumi Yidden, if they lived in the land over the river Sambatim, they obviously were Fumi Yidden, they still learned, which means they're involved with their own Avodah, but they have no shaykhs to the rest of the world. They don't interact or interconnect with the rest of the Ummah Sa'olam. You see what I'm saying? They have nothing to do with the Ummah Sa'olam. That means that their tachlis is for themselves, to accomplish the inyan of a Goy Kodesh. But they're not Mamlachat Kahanim. They're not a kingdom of priests for all nations of the world. They don't interact with Ummah Sa'olam. And according to that shita who says that they're dispersed in the Ummah Sa'olam, it means that they don't interact with the Ummah Sa'olam as a Jew anymore. They've lost total identity as a Jew. For all practical purposes, they are the Ummah Sa'olam. They've been totally swallowed up and integrated in the body called the Goy. But that means that they're involved in their own avodah, in their own resurrection and retrieval of their own Oris. They are no longer involved in the retrieval of the Oris from the entire world. You see, that's the aspect of Mamlachas Kahanim. They've lost that. That was the Inish, that they lost one aspect of their Tachas.
Well, there's a sefer, if anyone's interested in seeing all these midrashim, it's called the Siyas Aseret HaShvatim.
Yeah, there's four written on.
It's a small sefer, it's out now.
Were there any big people that followed this theory?
All midrashim.
Which theory?
I mean, that this river Sambatyon, it's never been...
No, it's never been substantiated.
Did they make it up?
No, but the midrash Chazal, if you see, I have the sefer, I mean, they're
yeah, Yehuda, Levi, and Yosef ben Yamin, I think. But everyone else, all the, you don't find God, V'Ashav, Zvulun.
That creates a lot of problems.
It's incredible how they're all gone.
The original, we had 600,000 Shirashim with the Shirashim of Ansklal Israel of Adam Rishon,
Yeah.
and 600,000
Yeah,
Shirashim.
but they're misaking their own thing. It doesn't matter. Wherever they are, they mean misaking those Shirashim. It's not that's not okay.
Of course, they say that, that they're still around.
In any case, therefore, the only ones really who are involved in this triangle, well, the ones who are involved in this triangle essentially are all Jews, even the Asar Shvatim. You see, in a sense, if they're assimilated with the Goyim. But the ones who are visibly manifest with this thing, and the Jews of history that have interacted with the Goyim, are fundamentally Yehud and Levi. We come, from all these two Shvatim that we see throughout history in this really triangle. In any case, the other thing that we said last week is that the concept of Amalek, that again, that Klal Yisrael needs a repository that corresponds to it in terms of Tumah, of the Goyim, which means that the more Chatoim that Klal Yisrael do, the greater Hashchasa, right? It means that it requires an Ummah of lower and lower standing to absorb those Eretz of higher Tumah. Why? As we explained last week, because those Eretz, as the Hashchasa goes greater, then those Eretz go to deeper and deeper levels of Tumah. You see, which means that you need a nation which is yonik from deeper and deeper levels of Tumah in the Sitra Achra, in which to rechannel it. And we came to the amazing conclusion last week that Amalek was the one who was chosen at the bottom of the ladder. The one who was chosen at the top was Mitzrayim. That the Jews of Mitzrayim took back all the earth from themselves and of the entire world to be Matzah the Bria. And it was the Kavanah of Matan Torah, you see, to be the Gula Rishona and the Gula Shlema. They lost it by the Chet of Egel. And Moshe said that specifically. When Moshe Rabbeinu said to Klal Yisrael that you will never again see Mitzrayim, it didn't only mean because we're about to destroy the Mitzrayim in Yam Suf. But what he basically meant is that Mitzrayim never again will be an Ummah, the repository which will retrieve your earth. Never again. Why? Because Mitzrayim only can correspond to the level of Hashchasa where you're holding now. You see. And Mitzrayim's got that koyach. And Mitzrayim is related to the koyach of Ishmael. But what Moshe said was, inferentially, that if you somehow transgress and you nullify the efforts of what we've done now, then you will descend lower. You will require therefore an ummah of more severe portions, of someone who has a bigger tumah, which means that we have to come on to the nefesh of Esav, the nefesh of Esav, to retrieve it. No longer will the nefesh of Ishmael suffice. And Kachoya, we find that it was the nefesh of Esav and so on. And the interesting thing also that you find that there's a medrash and so on that says there that by the chet, I think it was by the medrash by the chet of Yerovam ben Nevat, the beginning of Rome started. It says that I think by the Egel of Yerovam ben Nevat there was the first beginning of the Indian of Gabriel's stuff.
No, that was by the first Egel.
Was it? No,
I don't think so.
No, by Yerovam.
You sure? I really don't think so.
Yes, I think
The
it
Gemara
is.
says that
I don't know what it meant.
But the Egel Azov.
No, you know when they did it. You know what they did when the Meraglim came back from Eretz Yisrael and they were heady called. They said then it says that the Gabriel stuck a heady called into.
Is that what it was?
Yeah, it says over there that they cried for no reason at all. They'll cry once for a reason.
Oh, so it started then.
But in potentially, only in potentially.
Only in potential, it started. But the interesting thing is, if you follow it through, and we're not going to do that. That I think with Yerovam there was another very substantial growth of the empire of Rome, kingdom of Rome. Although Rome didn't exist at that time, Yerovam was much earlier, and so on. But the forerunners of Rome was called the Etruscans, and the Etruscans started around that time, I think. The Etruscan Empire, the Roman civilization took off from the Etruscans, and they had a great civilization.
The Latins conquered the Etruscans.
Well, the Latins conquered. If you follow the thing, interestingly enough, you'll find how Esav began to grow and grow, to gradually become the repository in that kind of sense. Now,
they grow from the Eretz in the Eden. That's
who?
They grow from the Eretz in the Eden.
Yeah, they only grow from the Eretz. Esav can only grow from the Eretz of the Eden. You see, because that's in you're dying with the Esav. Remember we typed last week? How you're dying with the Esav. The function of the Esav is to be the Yadayim. you'll be Nidayim on Yisrael in which to retrieve the earth.
That depends on the Sultan, who the Sultan directs ours to
Yes,
go to.
depends on where Klal Yisrael is holding in terms of which nation is chosen, that kind of sense. We can just go through some examples of the thing, and you find two very critical examples of that, which I really should mention. And well, first of all, you find that the shibudim of Klal Yisrael have varied. The first shibud of Klal Yisrael was Mitzrayim, you see, but that was supposed to be the first and last shibud. The last, shibud means the ummah which retrieves the earth for Klal Yisrael. Later on, you find Klal Yisrael went into in the times of the Shoftim, they went into different kinds of ummahs that were miyased them in Eretz Yisrael, you see. And then you find the thing became much worse, and so on. And the time, then you find Bavel, by the Churban by Rishon, Bavel, Persia, Greece, Yovan, and then Esav. You find the Dalit Shibudim, or the four great Shibudim of Klal Yisrael, are really in the nations of Bavel, Babylonia, Persia, Paras, Yovan, Greece, and Esav. Those correspond to really the four different levels, and they're somewhat hierarchical.
Is those four.
Yes, those four.
Cheshach is Yovan and the Sahom is...
Now, what the Banishim basically said was that, like I say, as Klal Yisrael does more chatoim, then the Ummah which is chosen becomes deeper and deeper embedded in Tumah, in that kind of sense. And these various different kingdoms of Shibudim represent the various different levels of Ashchos of Klal Yisrael, and so on. I'm not going to go into that. That's a whole limit in and of itself. The last Shibud is the one of Esav. And what the Banishim said, basically, is that once you fall in the Shibud of Esav, then you're in deep trouble. You see? Because Esav has the deepest koyach, Esav has the strongest affinity to Kedusha, number one, you see, and has the deepest koyach in the sense of Tumah. And Amalek is the bottom of Esav. Amalek is the worst Tumah in Esav. So what the Banishim said, once you fall in their hands, then you're in deep trouble. And that Shibud will last for a very, very long time. Now, let's just briefly follow the Shibudim of Klal Yisrael. You find by the Churban by Rishon in 580 BCE. You see, there was the Churban of Beis Hamikdash, which is a very staggering blow. Obviously, the Hashchot of Klal Yisrael was such that it caused the complete Golus. A tremendous amount of the Eretz left and went into the Golus, and the Shechina picked up and left. You see, and went into the Klippas or went to Golus. You see, in a very, very powerful degree. Now, obviously, where were these oils transferred? They were transferred, obviously, to Bavel, in terms of the oils, to a great deal of oils. However, there was something else. These oils were also transferred to another nation. And there was a new thing that happened that never really happened before, at that time. There was a certain event that happened around the time of the Churban by Rishon, which has very staggering implications for the entire world. It changed the face of humanity, fundamentally. And it happened around the same time. At that time. The nation that the Eretz went into was Greece, or Yovan. To a large extent, many Eretz went into Yovan. Now, Yovan was not involved with Klal Yisrael yet. You see. But the beginning of many of the Eretz went in. Remember we said that the Eretz of Klal Yisrael have two qualities, Tiferes and Oiz? Remember that? A great deal of the Oiz went into Bavel, and Bavel was able to conquer Klal Yisrael and destroy the Beis Hamikdash. But a great deal of the Tiferes went into Yovan, because in the 5th century BC, around the time, there was an individual, the Greek philosopher started, and the first of the Greek philosophers, his name was Thales, Thales, of Miletus. I don't know if you've ever heard of him. He is considered the father of science. He is the first one that began to analyze the phenomena and events of history in a methodological, rationalistic way, without coming on to religious explanations.
He's the first one to look at the stars and say that it's just light.
That's just light?
Not Turkus.
Yeah, not Turkus, yes. He is the father of science. The beginning to look into reality from the Indian of Chokhmah, or Haskalah, started then, in Greece. And that's the great contribution of Greek philosophy, because from Thales and all, Pythagoras and all things, down to Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, you see, came all the Chokhmah that would influence the next 2,000 years. Since Aristotle, all the Chokhmah of Aristotle, as you know, influenced the entire Dark Ages and the medieval period. all the way up to the 17th century, to the Age of Enlightenment, to the French Revolution, the Age of Enlightenment, at that time. But Aristotle held sway, the Chochmah of Aristotle, even the Rambam, even the Rishonim, many of the Rishonim were involved in the Chochmah of Aristotle. You see, his Chochmah held sway, you see, for 2,000 years. The Greek Chochmah held sway, and the Greek philosophy was the forerunner of the basic rationalistic approach of Western civilization. All Western civilization is based on the Chochmah of the Greeks. Rome, the whole Chochmah of Rome, is a takeoff from the Chochmah of the Greeks. Even the religion was a takeoff of the Greek religion. You see. And the ability to look at the world, mitoch haskola or Chochmah, started at that point. And that was given to the Goyim about that time. You see. Our entire scientific tradition, you see, also from the Greeks, although it's not from Aristotle. It's not like, it's really from other branches of Greek philosophy, really more from Archimedes. There were other Greeks that were more in that tradition. But the notion of looking at the world in that sense, essentially, is all a Greek tradition.
Our formal logic still from Aristotle, unchanged.
Who?
The basic
Clinical logic.
Formal logic, yes.
In fact, there are many historians who say that after ancient Greece, there's really nothing more to study. Well, it's very arrogant to say such a thing. But there are many historians who hold that the basic fundamental tradition of all Western civilization came from Greece. Here again.
But the Sultan that does this sort of consciously to start giving orders to a certain movement, because that preparation goes on before they even actually get into there.
The preparation goes on before, yeah. That's always
so what criteria does the Sultan use in order to transfer orders to a certain nation? Is there any criteria?
There are obviously criteria, some of them what you say, but to know these things, you've got to know, obviously, in order to know the inner meaning of what goes on, or to understand the dynamics, the movement of the inner mechanisms, you've got to understand what? You've got to understand the level of hashchasa that Klal has reached, right? And you've got to understand the ummas of Olam at that time in terms of where they're holding in Tumah and their own koichas, to see which ones will take over that position, become the repository, you see. To know that, you've got to look into the koichas and nefesh of the ummas at that time. That's a whole study in itself. Remember, we spoke about the whole meaning of anthropology, or in a certain way, historical anthropology, you see. We're just looking at the outlines of the situation, not the details themselves. Now, by the Churban Bayis Sheni, there was again a major revolution in the world, in the Churban Bayis Sheni. What was the major revolution in the Churban Bayis Sheni? The beginning of Christianity. Now, the beginning of Christianity was a very notable event in the history of mankind. Why? Because Christianity was the first real, true deviation from Avodah Zarah, as far as Goyim are concerned. Goyim are also Mitzvah and Avodah Zarah. A Goy cannot be over Avodah Zarah or believe that there are koichas in the Bria which transcend those of the Bnei Shalom, or that he withdrew from the Bria in some way and is no longer represented in any real way. That's Avodah Zarah to a Goy. And Goyim are also Mitzvah against that. You see, they are Mitzvah against that. The first real breakaway from that tradition was Christianity. Because in Christianity, which is molded to a great extent from Yiddishkeit, the concept of a God, you see, and of salvation of an ummah, the concept of a chet, and the concept of kedusha, the concept of prophecy, many of the concepts in Yiddishkeit were stolen, if I might say, from the Christians, and they began to develop that, but as a replacement for Jews. And they tapped on some partners to God. Now, halachically, that's not considered, in a logic sense, for many Rishonim, it's not considered Avodah Zarah for Goyim. You see, the fact that Goyim believe in a Trinity, you see, the fact that God has two assistants, Jesus and the Holy, the Spirit, or whatever the story is and so on, is not tantamount to Avodah Zarah to them. You see, because as long as they distinguish God, who they call God the Father, as a separate entity who governs the Bria, you know, if he's got two VPs sitting next to him, that's how it's made on. If God runs a board and he's the chairman of the board, okay, you know, that's called shituf or partnership. You see, and that kind, it's like, you know, but
that's why it's not really Avodah Zarah.
It's not really Avodah Zarah for them. For us, it is. Yeah. It's a pagam and Hashem echad, but for them, it's not. But it constitutes the first real deviation from Avodah Zarah. So, as such, Christianity is a hechekite. It's an elevation as far as the Goyim are concerned. Now, where did they get that schutz? Where did they get the zchus to be elevated? From the Yidden. Because the Yidden lost at that time. Because the Yidden lost in the second Beis HaMikdash, because they lost the koiches of Kedusha then, they therefore lost the opportunity to bring Hashem Echad in the Bria. You see, they lost that opportunity. The tachlis of Yidden is to be Mezach the Bria and to be Magali Yechudai. They failed to be Magali Yechudai. And because they were failed to be Magali Yechudai, the Satan was Magali Yechudai. But the Satan was Magali Yechudai in the Ummah Olam. Now you may say, well, what's wrong with that? Because it's not true Gili Yechudai, it's a corruption of Gili Yechudai. You see, it's not that the Goyim are marking the Banisham Emes and they're marking the Inyan of Yisrael, they're marking Christianity and so on. And Adarabah, you see, their Gili Yechudai, and whatever level they were zercha to, is a distortion to Klal Yisrael, and it constitutes a threat to Klal Yisrael. Because what they're saying is that our Gili Yechudai is bigger than your Gili Yechudai. You see. So if we think that it was a schut that happened, it wasn't. But there was a kedusha. That the fact that there was zercha to a higher level of Gili Yechudai shows that there's a kedusha which went transferred over to the goyim. You could see that. You know what I mean? You can see by from the Chum Bayasheni that there was a kedusha that went into it. There was an Indian of Tiferes that went over. But that kedusha is a kedusha which is held in the hands of the Satan in the Tumah, which means that Gili Yechudai is replete with tumah. You see, even though the core of it is kedusha first, and the tumah of that thing represents what? The notion that it's a tremendous threat to Klal Yisrael, and they're constantly trying to destroy Klal Yisrael. As a result, what?
It came through a Yid.
It came through the Yid itself. Yes, yeah, it came through the Yid itself in that kind of sense.
What you're saying is the iris ideally is supposed to function for Gil Yehuda.
Yeah.
When they go to the Satan, and here's the Koyach, and they evidence themselves in Ummah Olam, their expression is Chachma, in that sense it's not a Shabbat, but it's Chachma that gives the impression of Hester Yehuda, of Yeshua Muvado, like science, technology.
It's
that's a perversion of Tiferes.
Yes.
Would you say the perversion of Oz is Yisurin? In other words, what happens is when the Oz is not right, they're
shirlet. They have the koyach, the power, Rome.
It becomes Yisurin.
Yes, that becomes
the version of Tiferes is the Chachma of the Hester Yehuda.
Yes. Tiferes always refers to Chachma.
And these represent dual functions of the Halacha Yichud and the Tikkun.
Yes, in the Tikkun, that's right. Essentially what you're saying is right. You're repeating what you're saying it's the essential point. Kedusha has two facets, and you almost always remember that. Tiferes and Ois. When Klal Yisrael loses those Ois, right, you can always see the Ois, when you see it by the Ummah Olam, you also recognize it in terms of these two koyches, Tiferes and Ois. Tiferes representing Chochmah, in terms of Haskalah, Hasagas Yichudai, and Ois representing Hatzlacha, in terms of koyach, to get things done, to be matzliach, to affect changes in reality. You see. And you find that these two factors are transferred with the transference of the Ois of Kedusha. You see. Now it is the job of the Hanagas HaYichud, or the Haftocha, to bring both of these Ois back, both of these factors back. Klal Yisrael has to get back the Ois, right, and the Tiferes. Where do you see this? Where do we see this, for example? You see, it's Oleinu. When we finish with this, we've got to go over Oleinu Shabeach Adon HaKol. We will see many of the concepts. The Al Kei Nekav L'cho Hashem L'keinu Lirois what? Mehira B'Siferes Uzacha. Lahavi Gululim Min Haaretz V'Olilim Koreis Yikoreisim. L'Tzakem Olam B'Malchus Shakai. V'Chol B'nei Bato Yiku B'Shmech L'Havnei Selecha Kol Yerushay Oretz. You see. But fundamentally, B'Siferes Uzacha. You see. When you're talking about Ad Mosai Uzacha Ba'Shevi V'Tifa'atcho B'Yad So. Soleno.
No, the Yad Shevin.
It comes from a Tilim. I forget what's
it's Tilim, though, right?
Yeah, it's Yom Sheva, but it comes from Tilim. It's one of the Tilim.
Yes, I know.
Yeah, but that's fundamentally the thing. And we constantly see this kind of transfer. You see, and it is a function of the Hanagas HaYichud to retrieve the Ois and Tiferes. Okay, we'll be getting into this theme much deeper. You'll see a connection here which is very, 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 very important here. In terms of that.
Would you say one's
in fact, maybe I'll go into it now. Once I'm saying this, then I'll go on to things.
Would you say that the Yisurin is the illusion of Yeshua Muvado?
Let me say it now because it's a very critical thing, and I'll amplify it on it later on. Okay? You remember we've given, many times we've said in different shurim, the concept of the Trei Mashiachin. Remember that? There were many concepts of the Trei Mashiachin. We said, Mashiach ben David, Mashiach ben Yosef. Remember? We personified the essence of Yosef. Remember? The essence of Yosef is really personified through Chet. Yosef deals with Chet. And David deals with mitzvah. Or schus. Remember there are two tikkunim? First there's the tikkun of Yosef, and there's the tikkun of David. The tikkun of Yosef means to save the world from Chet. Yosef deals with tumah. Because Chet fundamentally is tumah. What is the immediate consequence of Chet? Obviously, tumah. That's what happens. The iris goes to the Satan. The whole therefore the entire union of Yosef in the fundamental process, you see, is the retrieval of this iris or this kedusha, right? Back to Klal Yisrael through tumah. So Yosef in some way is always involved with an interaction with tumah. And you see that of course by the Yosef himself, who was the forerunner, he was the Av. He was Yosef himself who was the forerunner of the Koyach itself. Where Yosef went into Mitzrayim and was Omer as a tzaddik, right? And by being Omer as a tzaddik, he retrieved those Oris. And he first formulated that path which goes back. You see. Yehuda didn't. Yehuda doesn't have that job. It's really Mashiach ben Yehuda. But it's called Mashiach ben David because Yehuda lost the schus because of the chet that he did. He sold Yosef. So because of that, and it says, the Ika Koyach that comes from David is not David, it's Yehuda. Right? Mashiach ben Yosef, and the brother of Yosef that had the Koyach was Mashiach ben Yehuda. David HaMelech comes from Yehuda. Malchus space Yehuda. The Haftorah was Kigo Aya Yehuda. Right? So the Haftorah goes to Yehuda. Really. But we never say Mashiach ben Yehuda. We always say Mashiach ben David. Because of the fact Yehuda was involved in selling Yosef. Because of that, Yehuda lost the Ika Chelik of that portion, and that Koyach went down further until it got to David HaMelech. And it's called Mashiach ben David. He became the Av to the Mashiachas, to that process, not Yehuda. Because it says, Vayehu Yehuda me'achav. Yehuda went down. He went down in schus because of what he did in part of selling Yosef. But in any case, what?
Yeah.
In any case, what we find is that if David therefore personifies the other process. What is the other process? The other process is that once the world is taken out of its tumah, once the others are taken back from the tumah and brought back to Klal Yisrael, then the world loses its tumah. You see, it loses its tumah and becomes in a state of tahara. No, not kedusha. It's tahara from tumah. The world then is restored to a state of mater. You see, or to put it a little more deeper, the distortion of the Sitra Achra is lost, and the Yetzirah himself becomes a normalized malach. In other words, the distortion of the Nachash. Remember we had that whole shir? The disfigurement and the distortion of the Nachash is lost, and the Nachash becomes cured.
No more need for Nachash.
What? In other words, the Nachash is no more deviant malach in that kind of sense, but the Nachash now represents